Last week, we covered some of the biggest trends in the American automotive landscape, including new technologies and global trends that companies need to stay aware of. We mentioned the changing landscape of where cars are built in America, but we thought it deserved an episode of its own. Today, that's our focus, whether American manufacturing is really about American companies at all. Over the last few decades, more and more automakers from overseas, like Toyota, Honda, and Volkswagen, have established manufacturing centers here in the US. When it started, it was a big change from the status quo, with the big three dominating the landscape and building most of their cars in the Rust Belt, particularly Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio. These foreign companies made dramatically different investments than what had carried the big three for decades before. They built plants in the southeastern states, and they generally sought out non-union workforces. It's been a point of contention for the UAW, who tried to establish unions at various facilities in Mississippi and Tennessee. The Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, for example, is on the brink of organization, much to the concern of more conservative politicians in the region.
But the unionization element is small compared to just how dramatically the landscape for American automotive manufacturing has changed. A report from IHS says that in 2000, 25% of the 17 million vehicles were built south of Ohio. In 2016, that will rise to 50%. Essentially, all those foreign-owned companies are dramatically outpacing the big three. It could soon be responsible for a majority of the production here in America. The reasons for that shift are many, and low unionization is actually one of the less critical ones. Southeastern states are doing a lot of work to entice manufacturers right now, offering low energy rates and attractive incentive packages. Energy is cheap and there's plenty of space to build new, modern plants. Rolling out new infrastructure to meet demand is easier. But one element that everyone seems to be forgetting about is the labor force. Pundits say foreign automakers like the Southeast because the labor is cheap, but it's also because they're highly skilled and very motivated.
For example, Kia's highest-ranking US official recently told Manufacturing.NET that the decision to build in West Point, Georgia, was driven primarily by a workforce once tied to the now dying textiles industry. He told us that because many people in Georgia and other southeastern states are looking for work after losing their jobs in other industries, Kia had a wealth of people to work with. It's a dramatically different picture than the labor shortage of hundreds of thousands of jobs that the greater manufacturing world keeps talking about. On top of their numbers, he said that generally, the southeastern workforce is attuned to hard, mechanical work and has great discipline.
The future of manufacturing, turning your paper-labeled boxes into smart containers with ProView. Eliminate paper labels and cards on cycling containers, providing automated tracking and dynamic visual interaction with operators. This system features a rugged e-paper screen that, unlike paper, can be changed dynamically, allowing operators to receive new instructions in real time for light speed corrections and process exception handling. These smart containers become immediately traceable, enabling real-time data collection on asset flow for advanced process analytics, and real-time, accurate inventory counts are achieved with no manual counting. Find out more about ProView at omniid.com.
With those benefits in mind, one might start to wonder if the big three will follow the greater trend to manufacture more vehicles in the South. They certainly won't be able to shake the unions, but perhaps they could tap into a different workforce with different skills and insights into what it takes to make a great car or truck. Reshoring may change the game completely. It's well known that companies like Ford and GM are using lower cost areas to manufacture parts and assemble vehicles for American drivers. But as many companies are finding, the total cost of manufacturing abroad is rising, while the costs of building here are staying relatively flat. We've already seen the big three make major investments into their existing plants, but will they bring operations from overseas back to the US? And if so, will they return to their home in the Rust Belt? In October, GM opened a new stamping plant in Arlington, Texas, which will help it reduce shipping costs and ease logistics. That sounds great, but the company also announced nearly $700 million in investments to a plant in Mexico that makes the Chevy Silverado. With investments to engine plants in Flint and 4 planned facilities in China by 2015, it's hard to say what GM's direction is.
Ford is building its relatively new fusion in a Wayne, Michigan plant, but also has announced major investments at its Louisville plant to make the Lincoln MKC. A stamping plant in Hamburg, New York, also received $150 million plus 350 new job prospects in late November. Aside from the Louisville plant, Ford seems pretty focused on the Rust Belt. Chrysler, on the other hand, recently announced a massive $1.3 billion investment in Mexico, while also making major hiring moves in the Detroit area. A few transmission plants received more funding earlier this year, which means that generally speaking, the plan is pretty clear. The Big Three is still very much focused on its old haunts. But with that percentage of vehicles made south of Ohio growing, one wonders just how long Detroit can hold on as the nation's car capital. Success in the Rust Belt will depend on the way each company maximizes the use out of every facility, machine, and employee. So stay tuned for next week's episode, where we'll talk about some of those strategies. No company will stay successful for very long without them.